Millions of Americans enjoy the serene beauty of lakes like Lake Lanier every year. They fish, they boat, they swim, and they create memories on its calm, glistening waters. But beneath the surface, where sunlight struggles to reach, lies a dark secret, one buried in silt and a century of silence. It's the ghost of a black community, violently cleared out and later submerged, almost erased from history. And this isn't just one story. This is the story of how progress became a weapon, of how America used concrete and water to drown black communities take their land and bury their histories. It's time we surface these truths, acknowledge what lies beneath, and ensure these communities are never forgotten again. What happened under the waters of Lake Lanier wasn't an isolated incident. It's a chilling chapter in a much larger story of American history. Across the country, thriving black communities were dismantled and submerged, their existence washed away under the banner of public works and economic development. But these weren't just random acts of infrastructure. It was a disturbing pattern. It was the weaponization of progress itself. Where did this pattern come from? It was often born from a toxic mix of racial violence and raw economic jealousy. Many of these towns were beacons of black success in the post-Reconstruction era, places where black families owned land, built businesses, and created self-sufficient communities. That success was often met with violent resentment. Mobs and night riders used terror to drive black residents from their homes, forcing them to abandon everything they had built. This violence was often followed by systemic land theft. Then, years later, government-funded infrastructure projects like the building of massive dams and reservoirs delivered the final blow. Planners, seeking to provide power and water to growing cities, would route their projects directly through these now vulnerable, depopulated, or marginalized areas. The result was the complete physical and historical erasure of these towns. Homes, schools, churches, and even cemeteries disappeared beneath the rising waters, silencing the stories and contributions of entire generations. Oscarville, Georgia. Nowhere is this tragic pattern more vivid than in the story of Oscarville, Georgia. Before it became a watery grave at the bottom of Lake Lanier, Oscarville was a small black community in Forsyth County. It was part of a county where by 1912, over 1,000 black residents lived, with many families owning their land or working as skilled craftspeople. They had built a life from the ashes of the Civil War, creating a foothold in the heart of Georgia. But their presence bred resentment. In September 1912, the brutal assault of a young white woman, May Crow, became the spark that lit the fuse of racial hatred. With no evidence, blame was immediately cast upon the black community. A 24-year-old farmhand named Rob Edwards was arrested, but a white mob dragged him from his jail cell, beat him, and lynched him in the town square. Two black teenagers, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel, were swiftly convicted by an all-white jury and publicly hanged. This kicked off a coordinated campaign of terror. Night riders swept through Forsyth County, firebombing churches, burning homes, and giving every black family a brutal choice: leave or die. The campaign worked. Within months, the county's black population of over 1,000 was violently driven out, reduced to almost zero. They fled with only what they could carry, forced to abandon their homes, farms, and history. Their land was then taken over by white residents. For decades, the memory of what happened was just a ghost story. Then, in the 1950s, the U.S. government delivered the final insult. As part of a plan to build the Buford Dam and create a reservoir to supply water and power to Atlanta, the government began buying up the land where Oscarville once stood. The remnants of the town, the foundations of homes, forgotten cemeteries, the ghosts of a once vibrant community, were unceremoniously flooded. Lake Lanier, named after a Confederate soldier, was born, and Oscarville was drowned. While the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did buy out property owners, the compensation was often inadequate and couldn't account for the wealth and land stolen by terror decades earlier. Today, Lake Lanier is a recreational hub that generates enormous revenue, but its waters hold a chilling legacy of violence, theft, and erasure. Kowaliga and Susanna, Alabama. The story of drowned black towns ripples far beyond Georgia. Let's travel to Alabama, to what is now Lake Martin, another massive man-made lake. Beneath its waters lie the memories of two thriving black communities, Kowaliga and Susanna. Kowaliga was a remarkable achievement. It was founded in the late 19th century by John Jackson Benson, a formerly enslaved man who purchased thousands of acres of land, part of the very plantation where he had been in bondage. He sold parcels to other black families, and together they built a community. Kowaliga was more than a town. It was home to the Kowaliga Academic and Industrial Institute, a prominent school for black students. John's son, William, even established the Dixie Line, the first black-owned railroad in the United States. Nearby, the town of Susanna also had its own school and businesses. But this progress was cut short. In 1923, Alabama Power began building the Martin Dam on the Tallapoosa River to generate hydroelectric power. When the dam was completed in 1926, the rising waters created the 41,000-acre Lake Martin. The communities of Kowaliga and Susanna were in the flood path. Residents were forced out, and the towns, including hundreds of graves that had to be moved, were submerged. Today, the area is a resort community, its name attached to a bridge and restaurant, with little public acknowledgement of the pioneering black town that lies beneath. Vanport and Robinette, Oregon. This destruction wasn't just a phenomenon in the South. The pattern repeated itself across the country, rooted in the same systemic disregard for black lives. Let's look at Oregon. First, Vanport. Built in 1942, Vanport was the nation's largest public housing project, created for shipyard workers during World War II. It was a diverse city, and for many African Americans it offered the first chance at well-paying industrial jobs. At its peak, over 40,000 people lived there, but racist housing policies in nearby Portland meant Vanport was one of the few places black families were allowed to live. On Memorial Day, 1948, this vulnerability turned catastrophic. After heavy rain, a railroad dike holding back the Columbia River collapsed. A wall of water tore through the city, which was built on a floodplain, and in a matter of hours, Vanport was gone. 18,000 people were left homeless. While the flood was a natural disaster, its devastating impact on the black community was a direct result of segregation. Nearly a third of the displaced were African American, and with Portland's discriminatory housing market, they had nowhere else to go. And then there's the quieter story of Robinette, a small town in eastern Oregon. In 1958, its fate was sealed by the construction of the Brownlee Dam on the Snake River. As the reservoir filled, the entire town was submerged. While Robinette wasn't exclusively a black town, its story is part of the broader pattern where marginalized, politically powerless communities were sacrificed for the greater good. Their histories, like so many others, were simply drowned. Princeville, North Carolina. Not all these stories are relics of the past. The forces that drowned Oscarville are still at work today, just in a different form. For proof, we look to Princeville, North Carolina. Princeville holds a sacred place in American history. Founded in 1865 by formerly enslaved people on the swampy floodplain of the Tar River, it's the oldest town incorporated by African Americans in the United States. They called their first settlement Freedom Hill. But from its very start, Princeville's existence has been a battle against water. Its location, on land white landowners were willing to sell, made it inherently vulnerable. The town has endured major floods for over a century, rebuilding time and time again. In 1965, a dike was built to protect it, but in 1999, Hurricane Floyd overwhelmed the levee, submerging the town in water up to 23 feet deep. Then, in 2016, Hurricane Matthew struck, and Princeville was inundated again. Princeville's story isn't about a single dam. It's about the enduring legacy of environmental injustice. The town's location is a product of systemic racism, forcing its founders onto the most vulnerable land. Today, the slow response and inadequate funding for recovery highlight how these communities continue to face systemic neglect. After Hurricane Floyd, there was even a proposal to turn the historic town into a park, an echo of the very erasure other towns faced. The residents of Princeville refused. They chose to fight for their ancestral home, a living testament that the struggle against being washed away is far from over. The stories of Oscarville, Kowaliga, Vanport, and Princeville aren't just isolated tragedies, they're data points in a devastating historical trend. When you connect the dots, a horrifying picture emerges, one of targeted violence, mass displacement, and the theft of generational wealth. Think about the economics. Land is the bedrock of wealth in America. By 1910, just a few decades out of bondage, Black Americans had acquired over 16 million acres of land. The violent seizure of land in places like Forsyth County and the forced, undercompensated sales in areas slated for dam construction were a direct assault on this progress. This wasn't just the loss of a house, it was the theft of a future. It helped create the racial wealth gap that exists today, but the loss is more than economic. It's psychological. It's the trauma of being violently driven from your home. It's the severing of community bonds, and most insidiously, it's the erasure of memory. By flooding these towns, America didn't just destroy buildings, it destroyed evidence. It made it easier to forget that these independent Black communities ever existed. It replaced stories of Black success with serene, placid lakes, rewriting history with water and silt. This act of forgetting wasn't an accident. It was a core part of a system of racial oppression. To control the present and the future, you must first control the past. The history of these forgotten towns has been buried for far too long, but we have the power to unearth it. If you believe these stories need to be told, please share this with your friends and family. Spreading awareness is the first step toward justice. If you want to keep digging into the hidden history that shapes our world, make sure you subscribe. And we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments what you thought about this story. Do you know of a forgotten town? Let's use that space to share these histories and ensure they are never again silenced.